and welcome to Long Live the Queen, where we talk about the women who made history. And by we, I mean the royal we, because it's just me. Today, we're going to talk about Elizabeth Mure.
One day we will be remembered.
Elizabeth Mure was born in 1320. Her parents were Sir Adam and Janet Mure. We don't have a lot of information about her childhood, so fast forward. In 1336, she was married to Robert Stewart, the High Steward of Scotland, when she was about 16 and he was about 20. Married in that they purported to be married and lived like husband and wife. Not married according to the church. They hadn't jumped through all of the hoops for the church to recognize their marriage. Today, you could hear it referred to as a common law marriage, but a lot of people did that back then. The papacy was busy recognizing royal and noble marriages that were likely to be attacked by people wanting to disinherit the children of powerful men. This couple were life partners. I think it's sweet. It means they were probably in love. Robert and Elizabeth were in a bit of a gray area. Elizabeth wouldn't likely have expected more than a common law marriage. Robert probably should have jumped through the hoops for a papacy-sanctioned marriage, but he was busy at war. The English were being extra, and Elizabeth was 16 and her husband was 20. Their frontal lobes weren't fully formed, so long-term consequences of their actions probably weren't on their radar at the time.
Wow. You guys talk like grown-ups.
And Robert, by this point, was an orphan. Like any good Disney prince, he didn't have parents to push it. Elizabeth was from gentry, and common law marriages were just more common. After the death of Robert's grandfather, Robert the Bruce, Robert's Uncle David was the new King of Scotland. But Uncle David was only 5 years old, and Scotland wasn't politically stable. The English were still coming for them. The 5-year-old king's heir, as he had no children, was his nephew, the 13-year-old Robert Stewart, Elizabeth's future husband. The young king and his English wife Joan were sent to exile in France a few years later for their safety. Robert Stewart, an adult at this point, stayed in Scotland. Adult for the time, not something we would consider an adult now. So in 1336, when 20-year-old Robert Stewart married Elizabeth Mure, he, as the heir, probably should have made sure the Pope approved of their marriage. But everyone assumed that the young king, safely in France, would eventually grow up and have his own children, displacing his nephew as heir. In that case, it wouldn't matter if the church had approved their marriage. Robert Stewart was a placeholder. And again, Robert Stewart was busy. He was the High Steward and the heir, and helped lead Scotland against the English in the Second War of Independence. Plus, he had a ton of kids. The young couple were likely in love, and just wanted to start their lives together. In 1337, the year after they married, they had their first baby, that they named John, followed by Walter the following year, and just 2 years after that, little Robert was born. 3 years after Robert, Alexander was born. These 4 boys also had 6 sisters: Margaret, Marjorie, Johanna, Isabella, Catherine, and Elizabeth. I don't have birth dates for any of the girls. The couple had at least 10 children, but could have had as many as 13, because he may have had 3 children that we know nothing about other than that they existed. In his lifetime, he also fathered at least 12 illegitimate children. If you've lost count, he's up to 22 to 25 children because of the mystery kids, and we haven't even talked about his second marriage yet. King David still had no children, and his English wife didn't seem to like him much. Around the time Robert's 3rd son, Robert, was born, the king and his wife, now 17 and 20 respectively, returned from France. King David was able to effectively rule for about 5 years, but then he was captured by the English. Ruling Scotland again fell to his nephew, the 30-year-old Robert Stewart, Elizabeth's husband. Over the next 11 years, King David was held prisoner in England, but he was still able to retain some power in Scotland as king. Robert was running the country and not trying very hard to get his uncle, the king, back. They weren't close. King David managed for a while to have Robert removed from his council. And because his nephew wasn't trying to get him back, David didn't want to keep him as heir. So he was trying to arrange his own release. Part of the deal he tried to make was to make one of the sons of King Edward III his heir, meaning he was trying to take away his nephew's inheritance and give it to one of his wife's nephews. So the Scottish were like, no. You can't just give our country to your in-laws. If you listen to season 1, we're in the Edward III era. Remember him? He had a lot of sons and not enough inheritance to go around. So in this alternate reality, where this plan came to fruition, who would have been King of Scots? Legally, probably Lionel, the king's spare, but let's not forget his brother, John of Gaunt, who just so badly wanted to be king of anything. I don't think we can underestimate his plotting. King David was imprisoned in England from the time John of Gaunt was 16 until the time he was about 27. I can't help but think that this experience in his later formative years led to his, well, if I won't inherit a country, maybe I can get someone else's attitude. Elizabeth's husband, Robert, was back in the loop. It seems that King David was more trouble than he was worth to his nephew. Robert and Elizabeth continued growing their family. It was right about now that the couple regretted the decisions made in their youth. Maybe a legal marriage would be helpful. The king was still childless and imprisoned. His wife was allowed to visit him, but she didn't seem to be getting pregnant. Robert was still his heir, and Robert's heir was his oldest son, John. But Elizabeth's son, John, was not considered legitimate by the church. If this branch of the royal family was to take over, as it was starting to look more and more likely, they would be easy to topple if the church didn't back them. So Robert Stuart decided to get his marriage legitimized by the Pope, and thus retroactively legitimizing his children. Maybe where John of Gaunt got that idea too. Remember Catherine Swynford? Samesies.
Hallie, we're like twins.
This would be important for Elizabeth's children if they wanted to rule, and it was starting to look like they would. Only legitimate born children could be the King of Scots, and I think that he only bothered to get his 4 sons legitimized because who wants a queen regnant? Not them. King David II was held by the English for 11 years. His nephew wasn't in a hurry to bring him home. Elizabeth spent this time with her husband quite often, it seems, as they had 10 to 13 children together, with at least 4 boys and 6 girls. Elizabeth died sometime after her marriage was legitimized in 1447 because she was alive then, but before May of 1355. We know this because that is when her husband got remarried, sometime after the age of 27, but before the age of 35. Maybe from the plague, but likely some sickness. We're in the plague years of season 1 fame. A lot of people died of the plague. Her husband's uncle, the King of Scots, still imprisoned in England, her husband, the heir, and her oldest son, John, the heir of the heir. She was survived by her husband, Robert Stuart, and at least 10 of her up to 13 children. John, Walter, Robert, Alexander, Marjorie, Margaret, Johanna, Isabella, Catherine, and Elizabeth. And maybe the trio of mystery kids. Her oldest son, John, was at most 18 years old, but possibly as young as 11. What do you think of Elizabeth Mure? She was a common law wife who almost became Queen of Scots if she had just lived a little longer, because her husband wouldn't become King of Scots until after her death. I honestly just think she was living a happy life. Sure, there was war and sickness, but the potentially 35 years she had seemed happy, even if they were filled with in-law drama. That's relatable, and my in-laws aren't even royal. Recently, someone gave me a book recommendation. I read the book in one day. It was really good, guys. If you are looking for more information on John of Gaunt or any of his 3 wives, check out The Red Prince by Helen Carr. And thank you to Jillian Holdsworth for the recommend. Don't forget to share with friends and enemies. We welcome everyone here. Long live to all the queens out there. And until next week, bye.
One day will be remembered.
Thanks for listening.